Um, Session 4, starting at 3:30 and ending at 4:20 p.m. The title of this session is Academic Rigor in the Time of COVID. And with me, and they will also introduce themselves, are Heather Heckel from the School of Professional Extended Studies and Kim Westermeyer, a colleague of mine in the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning. So welcome to our session. And I'm going to have Kim drive the slides, and so I will ask her to advance to the next one. So there are a couple of guideline notices about what the session will operate like. So in terms of participation, you can use the hand function in the chat portion of your window. You feel free to use the chat box to post questions or comments directly into the chat box. I know that many of you have taught online for much longer than since the pandemic, and so we really welcome your thoughts and your expertise in, especially along the topic about academic rigor and teaching online. And finally, I do really want to have other voices, especially those who are new to online teaching, to pose those questions and really think through some of the concerns that has brought us to this particular session at the conference. Next slide. So there are 3 learning outcomes. One is to understand the academic regs regarding what our obligations are as faculty members in teaching our classes. These are directly written in the regs, and so we'll point to that. We want to also help define time on task. It's something that I think is going to make a lot of sense in terms of how you see the work that you create for your students and the work that you assign for their homework. And finally, we will go through an exercise where you will be able to calculate time on task. And so I know for me anyway, when I used to teach classes and I was thinking about what assignments to put out, I was sort of guesstimated in the back of my mind of how long it might take. But there are actually tools for this to help you out and be more critical about your expectations. And generally, what I would say is that we often tend to underestimate the amount of time that our students need to take care of these assignments, especially in these really extraordinary circumstances. And so we'll get to that exercise shortly. So the context, so what brings us here? There are 4 overlapping concerns. One is we need to keep our students engaged, especially during this time when everybody is virtual. As you've heard many times before from Sylvia Burwell to Peter Starr and Monica Jackson, that we need to keep our students engaged with us and with AU. It is important pedagogically, it is important financially, and so this is something that has driven a lot of our thinking about how we do that. So we want to be on camera, we want to be with our students synchronously much as possible. However, what we're finding out is that this is leading to Zoom fatigue, that people, both faculty and students, are bearing the burdens of being online all the time. And it's a real phenomenon. It is not something that people have made up to avoid taking classes or teaching and interacting with one another. There are some real psychological costs of being on, literally being on all the time. The other concern is the rigors of online teaching. There's concern that for lots of different reasons that we should be more thoughtful about how we assign homework and the amount of work that we expect from our students. On top of that, there may be some other stressors that are impacting our students. And so there are forces pushing us to be less burdensome in terms of the amount of work that we want to place on our students. And that gets to the question of academic rigor. And really, we're not asking you to relax the rigor of your classes. We're asking you to be thoughtful about what you're asking your students to do, keeping in mind what the objective of your courses are. And so there's this, in some ways, a conflict between what we perceive to be as rigor versus the stress and the amount of homework that result from that particular thinking. Next slide. So really the question becomes, how do we challenge our students, keep them engaged without overwhelming them? with a deluge of work, right? And so that's really the crux. And when you walk away from this session, you will have some concrete tools, if not sort of intellectual framework, but an actual calculator to figure out what you should expect your students to be able to do within the confines of your course in the context of other courses that our students are also taking, right? And so they're not just taking your course, many are taking 4 others, in some cases 5 others. And so we want to be mindful of that as well. Next slide. So what does the academic regulation say? These are words that come right out of our academic regs for undergraduates and graduates. You don't you don't have to read them, but in essence, because we follow the Carnegie category for what a credit hour means, each credit hour is supposed to be worth about 12.5 direct instruction. That is the work that we do directly with our students in their presence, or they in our presence, working on something, listening to us, we listening to them, working on content directly related to the work of the classroom. So 12.5 hours per credit hour, and then about 25 hours of student work outside of that direct instruction. This is per semester. Right? And so if you take this and you spread it across 15 weeks, next slide, we're talking about on average 2.5 hours of direct instruction, the stuff we do in class, or they're directly engaged in the course material, and about 5 hours of what we typically call homework. But as you will see, it's way more than just homework of outside of direct instructions each week. Okay, so again, if you think about what a typical student does for 15 credit hours, we're talking about a full-time sort of job, like 40 hours a week of stuff that they have to maintain, in addition to all of the other things that they are also trying to deal with, jobs in some cases, patchy connections to the internet, and you can imagine the whole array of other things that the students and we are also dealing with. And so these are rules or guidances that you should keep in mind as you figure out what you want to do with your courses. The 2.5 hours instruction, direct instruction, that is a fairly firm requirement of your classes, whereas the 5 hours is a very strongly recommended guidance. All right, so 2.5 hours of direct instruction. This is why we have 2 classes, each worth 75 minutes. Right? That's where that 75-minute classes come from, 150 minutes times 2. So that's in practice for AU and lots of other institutions. So what does that mean as we translate? Next slide. And so as we think about all these things, way we want to figure out what we want to do in our classrooms and what we expect our students to do. There's an idea called time on task that I'm going to hand this over to Kim to talk about. And it's, as you'll find, a very useful tool.
Yeah, so time on task is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's how long it takes for a student to complete anything that's in your course, any coursework that you have your students do. In the in-person space, the distinction between direct instruction and student work outside of instruction is fairly clear, right? When students are physically in the classroom, that's direct instruction. And when they're doing homework or reading or preparations or whatever, that's student work outside of direct instruction. In the online space though, we have so many more opportunities to interact with our students, for them to be able to receive this direct instruction, which can be really challenging when determining what exactly is what and what could be qualified or quantified as such, as direct instruction versus student work outside of direct instruction. I would caution you against equating asynchronous with student work and synchronous against as direct instruction, because there are some things that we ask our students to do that could potentially fall into both categories, or maybe fit better in one category. So we're going to take a look at a couple of examples later, but I want to caution you against thinking of that. As you think about adding in asynchronous pieces to try to avoid Zoom fatigue, I like to visualize this as marbles in a jar. So we're trying to reduce the amount of time together that we have synchronously via Zoom. And so marbles in a jar, we're not putting extra marbles in. We're not adding more work to our students' plate. We're simply just moving the marbles from jar to jar, right? So for example, like a discussion board could very much be direct instruction, which thereby means that you can reduce the amount of time that you spend synchronously together. There's so many opportunities in the online space for many different ways and forms of interaction. It's really exciting, but I also understand that it can be very overwhelming. So time on task, there are calculations that we can make, the assumptions that we can make that are based in research. So all of the information and all these numbers that I'm going to present to you are in fact based in research. The research has a tremendous amount of nuance and complexity. We've talked, Heather Kehoe and I were talking about this, and it seems like it's a very simple if this, then this, but it's a lot more complex than that. There's how much new material are the students encountering? What's the complexity of the task? Are they required to have citations, and what's the type of interaction they're having with each other? It's very complicated. They're averages too. They're not definitive numbers. So one student might take 5 minutes to do something, while another student might take 55 minutes. Try not to worry too much about the ranges, but know that one student's experience might be very different from another. And nor should you assume that a particular student, based upon certain characteristics, will take a certain amount of time. So when looking at time on task 2, keep in mind that the time it takes to complete a task often includes many more different stages that students are required to work through. For example, one task like a discussion board could mean that the different stages are they navigate to Canvas, they find the assignment, they read the instructions, they complete the task itself, and then maybe they process after completing the task. There's a social and emotional kind of effort that we sometimes have to put into the work in our classes that are not only intellectually stimulating and rigorous, but also challenge us personally, right? So keep that in mind when you're thinking about time on task 2. And a tip that I have is to design instructions and assignments as well as Canvas and Blackboard sites to reduce the amount of time that a student has to spend on finding something or understanding an assignment. The more detail you can add, the easier you can make things to find. It will reduce the amount of time that they are looking at and looking for a specific item and actually completing the task. If you're interested in this, the research on cognitive load is really, really interesting, but that's another workshop topic for another day. So here we are now in the example. So I'd say this is a pretty traditional conception of what a remote synchronous class could look like. So we have the very kind of traditional idea of asynchronous being student work and synchronous being direct instruction here. So we have the breakdown of a reading takes 50 pages, or 50 pages takes a student 140 minutes. A YouTube video takes 10 minutes. You'll notice that it takes students 15 minutes because they have to navigate to the video, right? There's the kind of administrative part of that too. And then maybe you have them complete an open note quiz with 10 questions, and that takes around 60 minutes. So then all said and done, the student work that's expected of them that they need to complete before class is 215 minutes. Then in class, you've broken up the time that you have together on Zoom into a lecture, group work, large group discussion, and then finally a summary lecture. That equals the 2.5 hours you're on Zoom for that. And then maybe after class on their own, the student is working on their individual presentation. Maybe this is week 3 and their individual presentation is due in week 7. Ideally, they are working on their presentation throughout the weeks so that by the time they get to the presentation, they are ready to go. Keep in mind that these calculations should be considered when we have long-term projects that take much more time or should be kind of worked on over several weeks here. So then here's another example of how you could possibly move the marbles around, mix up the direct instruction and the student work here. So you'll see that the reading is there. It's 25 pages. It takes students 70 minutes, which means that then the student work is 70 minutes. But then you also have a discussion board here. That's 250 words with citations. And this is calculated and could be considered as direct instruction, because not only are the students interacting with the material intellectually, they are also interacting with each other. And if you're active on the discussion board too, they're interacting with you. So that could mean then that instead of meeting for the full 2.5 hours synchronously via Zoom, you take away that 120 minutes. So that your synchronous Zoom time is more of a check-in. It's more of a large group discussion. Does anyone have any questions? I want to talk about this in a large group. And then that time together is truly maximized towards talking through specific issues. You'll notice then that also the discussion board post replies also count towards direct instruction. Same reasons as I stated before. That takes 72 minutes, depending upon the complexity of the task. But that's how you can break it up into the week so that you're not spending copious amounts of time on Zoom, but you're still having your students engage in the learning community that you've created for the class and still incorporating rigor and different skills into your course. This does not have to be a prescriptive structure for each week. You could have, this could be week 4 and this could be week 5. Providing that variety can be really interesting to students. Be mindful though of the due dates with these things. Make sure that those due dates are very clear for students. So then how did we arrive at these numbers here? There are 2 specific resources that I am going to add here in the chat. So the first website there is Wake Forest has a calculator for time on task, which is really, really neat. I encourage you to play around with it. It's really comprehensive. And again, that's where a lot of the research that we're looking at is coming from. It allows you to talk through, okay, so there's one major project. This is how difficult it is. This is how much reading I'm going to assign this week. So that this tool is calculating for you how much direct instruction time there is in your class on average, and how much student work outside of direct instruction is happening. It's a really great tool. It's used over and over again. There's many different instances of this. This one is probably the best one that I've seen. It's very comprehensive, and it incorporates that nuance and complexity that the research talks about in it. It's really great. I encourage you to take a look at that. The other site that I added is an American University site. So CTRL has created a guide on time on task. It's going to probably be fairly repetitive from what we're talking about in this workshop, but there is additional content that we talk through, as well as context that can help you determine kind of the calculations if maybe that time on task calculator is a little overwhelming. So we've simplified it a little bit, but we're really excited about sharing that with you and hope that it is useful as well. So now that we've shared some resources with you, we wanted to play a little bit of a game so that you are more involved in our presentation here. So we're going to play How Long Does It Take? As Kehoe mentioned, often the calculations and estimates that we make for our students for how long it's going to take them, it often takes them much longer than we think to complete these different tasks that we're asking them to complete. So I fully encourage you to use the Wake Forest calculator as well as the resources on the CTRL site. Absolutely, you can use those, not cheating at all. This is an open note quiz, stating expectations clearly here. So the first one that we're going to look at, and to answer, you can share in the chat. The questions that I'm going to ask you are, how long does a student, do you think a student will take on average? And then could it be direct instruction, student work, or both? So how long does it take? And or student work or both. Okay, so Kalani says 1 hour, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. Okay, great. Yeah, 200 words, by the way, is about half a page single spaced. Yeah, okay. 2 hours, yeah. 75 minutes, yep. It depends. Yes, that's almost the asterisk, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, Heather is mentioning that also too, the content of it matters as well, the emotional labor that could perhaps be there. So the research suggests on average it takes for 200-word discussion board posts with citations, 100 minutes. Yep. So it takes, I think, quite a bit more time than I initially thought. Where this is coming from too is whether or not the information is new material, the complexity of the material, things like that. Okay, so then next question is this direct instruction, student work, or both? Could be either student work, both, both. Yeah, absolutely. I started kind of with the tricky one here. I should have ended with this one. Ultimately, the decision is yours as the instructor of record to determine whether or not a specific task you are assigning students is direct instruction or student work. However, there are many more opportunities for you to change how you consider them because of the online space. So these are not necessarily hard and fast numbers, nor are they hard and fast distinctions that I'm providing you here. Okay, so a 50-page reading. Say a journal article. How long do you think it takes? 2 hours? 4 hours? 3 hours? 6 hours? Yeah, okay. 140 minutes, 5, yeah. Takes about 140 minutes. Yep. So again, nuance here. The nuance here is whether or not this is a complex issue, if they need to work through problems, anything like that, if these are new material, things like that. Yeah, and then direct instruction, student work, or both. Student work. Yeah, this one is predominantly student work because there is no interaction with anyone outside of the reading. So in terms of the flow of collaboration and communication, the student is really only interacting with the content. So that I would qualify as student work outside of the direct instruction. Yeah, last one, a group project, 500 words in length. And by 500 words in length, I mean the script for the presentation. 20 hours. Yeah. No students have ever written a script. I have to write a script for anything that I talk through. Yeah, it depends. Yep, it depends. Absolutely. There's so much gray area here that I hesitate from saying hard and fast, this is how long it's going to take, because there's a lot of different requests that you might make of students. Are they required to submit this 500-word script? Are they going to be using new technology? Is there a time difference that they need to work around in terms of the group project? Absolutely. Yeah. And, 500 words in length is about a one-page single spaced. So I imagine that probably our group presentations are going to be a little bit more, we're going to ask a little bit more of our students there. So it's going to take a long, long time. Yep. Luckily though, the different resources that we have for you allow you to not have to guess use the research, use the resources that we've provided to you and that exist already. You don't have to make it up necessarily. And you can use this information to inform the decisions that you make moving forward. So now talking about rigor and time on task, more work does not necessarily equal more rigor or more learning. It could make a course more challenging, but is it challenging in the ways that you want it to be for your students? Perhaps adding more work, adding more marbles to the jar means that time management becomes the challenge for our students rather than working through the intellectual complexities of our own disciplines. So thinking about, what are you adding to your students' load? Are you asking them to dive deep on one task in particular, or are you trying to spread out their efforts across multiple tasks? I don't have the right answer for you. Just want you to think about that. Because Kehoe mentioned the stress that's arising from students. We hear from students that on campus and also around the country, that stress is becoming more and more of a factor that affects their behavior here. And stress impacts academic performance, with 22% of students reporting lower exam grades, 9% reporting lower class grades, and 2% receiving an incomplete or dropping a class in the last year due to stress. When students are overwhelmed, their stress can lead to their learning decreasing. And one of the main identified stressors for students in college campuses in the US is academics. So couple this stress that academics can cause with this new phenomenon known as Zoom fatigue, and this online experience can be an extremely stressful semester for students. So, look at the time on task that you can use and the calculations that you can use in order to not necessarily make the course less challenging, but perhaps focus their times in different ways. Focus the time that they work on their own in different ways. Bring the challenge in so that maybe they're not spending 2.5 hours with you each week over Zoom. Maybe it's a little bit split up so that they can more manage their time that way. And now Heather is going to talk through her examples and how she works through in her own classes, how she reduces Zoom fatigue and work overload.
Thanks, Kim. I have to say I've learned so much working with Kim and Kehoe on this and using that website. So that's been exciting. What is less exciting is that I am experiencing today some Zoom fatigue, and I'm having a great deal of empathy with my students as I think about preparing my syllabi for next week. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but I certainly do. And so I want to open this, and I'll try to be brief, with mentioning that my educational training background is in a philosophy called constructivism. And even though they made me take like 12 classes in it, it synthesizes to 3 words, which is less is more. And it's a philosophy that I really believe in education. And so you might have seen me sort of wildly overestimating time on task in the activity that Kim just did. But the reason that I do that is because I design my courses for my activities to be very thought-provoking for students. And then I try to calculate in a pretty extended amount of time for thought-provoking. And a little bit of emotional content. I should go ahead and say I teach about the environment, and sometimes my students describe it as the end of the world course. So there's some emotional content to my work. So I want to ask you all a quick question, and if you're on screen, you can raise your hand. How many of you have thought of a lesson plan idea while you were driving the car, walking your dog, or in the shower? And if you have, and you're raising your hand now, then you know that we are wanting our students to do that too. And so if we don't calculate in that thought time, I think we're doing them a disservice because we're not really considering how much time they're spending on these things. So let me give you a couple of quick suggestions about what I do to try to address this. The first one is that I'm actually using a synchronous and asynchronous mix. So most class weeks, I actually only meet half of the class time, and the other half of the time is small group work, paired work, individual work, or work with their families, and in assignments that are highly structured. So I can still consider it to be direct instruction, but I'm not actually with them during that time. I got some positive feedback about that from students because it took them off Zoom an hour and 15 minutes a week. And so that seemed to work well. A second thing that I like to think about in time on task is not just weekly time on task, but the entire semester, and what it would feel like to be 18 years old and have 100 hours of work to do in final exam week or the week before. And in today's context, what it would feel like with the anxiety and culture that we deal with to have to do all of that. So I intentionally schedule my final exam at approximately week 9 or week 10. And then the remaining weeks I do professional activities, exploratory activities, problem solving activities. And I also meet with my students individually. So I found that to work really well. Some people respond and say, well, wait a minute, are you suggesting the last 3 weeks aren't important? Not at all. I'm suggesting the last 3 weeks are problem solving and the first 9 or 10 weeks have some vocabulary I need to test. The 2 key suggestions I would make the most, besides using Kim's suggested website, is something that I had not been doing. Have you done the assignment yourself? How many times do we design an assignment and not actually complete it ourselves? And so I didn't do them all, but I did a couple, and I went, oh my goodness, that took so much longer than I thought it did, particularly when my internet went off or I couldn't access a project or whatever. And I was like, whoops. Sometimes you're lucky, you teach complex problems and you can make your program leaders do some of them. And sometimes you have a teaching assistant, also a great check. Some of you might have high school or college age children in your home, also a great way to check your assignments and how long they take. So pass them out and actually check it. Another thing that I do is mid-semester, I interview students informally, but I pick a few. So I always pick an A student, I pick a student that's struggling, and I pick a student who fits a different demographic. That might be an English language learner or a student with significant exceptionalities. And I ask them if they will point blank honestly tell me how the class is going for them and how much time they're spending. That has been really helpful to me in adjusting my classes mid-semester. So those are my couple of course design suggestions. A few activities that I've used that seem to work well in reducing time on Zoom, as well as being engaging and also taking being educationally productive in the time that they have. I used some films. I attended a session just a few minutes ago in which the speaker said that films were the preferred way for students to learn in Generation Z. So I do use films, but I don't have the students watch the film alone. I require that they watch it with someone else in their life, and that's how I describe it. And so by the end of last semester, my students were like, yeah, my mom talks about you all the time. So first I went, oh gosh, I'm gonna be fired. And then I went, oh wait, what I did was get them off Zoom and into watching films with their families. And that was highly educational because then I asked them to interview the person they watched the film with and tell me what they learned together. So this is highly engaging, but it's off Zoom and it's pretty good for time on task assessment because I know how long the film is. A second thing that I love to do is send students away from the computer. And I honestly believe you can do this in almost any field, although if I were teaching physics, it might be harder, but maybe not. I have my students go outside and I have them observe the biodiversity in their front yards. If I were teaching math, I might have them look for math within the environment and within science. It doesn't really matter. If I were having English, I would ask them to go sit under a tree and write a poem and then take a selfie of them doing that. This is off Zoom, highly educational, and demonstrates something that they can do in the future after they leave my class. I try to do a lot of this kind of stuff. It also opens up student choice and student voice, which are important to me. Third, love choose your own adventure. And so this is student choice weeks. And what I do is I design very simple questions, but the students get to choose which one they do. And then they come back and in some way report it to me or their teams or someone else. And this might involve, for example, in my 11th week, I do a professional development student choice week. And so what I have is go out and research how environmental work works in your finance major, in your pre-law major, in your policy major. And then I give them one example and that's it. and then they return that to me. These are also open-ended assignments, so students who are outstanding students can write 6 pages to me, and students who are not can write 2 paragraphs, and that's okay because everybody tried. I love Choose Your Own Adventure, and I'm happy to talk about how to apply that across the curriculum. It's one of my favorite weeks. And then finally, I love show and tell. So I was talking with someone on the call, I'm sorry, I forget who it was, Noemi, I hope I said your name correctly, about how excited we were about the music Kim played at the beginning of this thing, and how embarrassed I was that I don't know how to stick music into my PowerPoint, but I'm gonna learn. So here was my idea. I show music the first day, and then I assign students in pairs to pick a song that's thematic with my course. So this would be environmental justice songs. And then they play the song to open each the class, and they discuss why they chose the song for 90 seconds. This is one of my favorite exercises in teaching is show and tell. I know it sounds like it's kindergarten, but it's not, because what it does is it gets students to explore the resources available to them, and these are resources they will use later. I also have students present their favorite Instagram site related to my course topic, their favorite podcast, and so I do this throughout the semester. It's a great fun way to open the course, but it actually takes the students a while, and they'll email me and they'll be like, I know I just presented one podcast, but I found these other 10, what do you think? And at that point, I know that they've spent 4 or 5 hours on an activity that I had required it only to be 15 or 20 minutes. So these are some of the things that I do to engage students, to get them off Zoom, sometimes on their phones, but off Zoom. And one last one, I like to do interviews. So I like students to interview each other. And this semester, during the second week, I will actually be asking them to pair up and to call each other on the phone. I'll do it within country to make that easier. Another way to step them off Zoom, and what they'll be doing is interviewing each other on their prior knowledge and their interest in my topic, and then they will present the other person's answers in the next class in writing. So it'll only take me maybe 5 minutes of class time, but it'll take them an hour and a half off of Zoom, and they meet each other. Couple of quick examples. I hope I didn't go through those too fast, but those are some ideas. Kim, our last slide. So what we would love to do in our time remaining is to have you tell us about your suggestions. And so I'm actually going to ask you to do all 3 of these simultaneously, because we do only have 15 minutes left, not what I would do in a class. And so what we would like you to do is in the chat, answer any of these 3 questions that you're interested in, but please tell us which one you're answering. So for example, if you're answering the first one, you would say my question. If you're answering the second one, you would say my favorite assignment. And so you can distinguish them for us. We'll give you 3 or 4 minutes. We'd love it if everybody would participate, giving one example. I'm also going to speak over while you're all doing this and thank Cortland for their comment. I did give environmental examples, but I'm more than happy to review other people's syllabi or to talk with you separately, and I'll stick my email in here. I love to engage in other topics, not just the environment. So again, if everybody could pick just one of these to talk about, we'd love to hear your questions, but we'd also love to hear your best assignment ideas. And I think I think we're gonna download this chat and share these afterwards. Is that right?
So I want to return to a point that has been raised about the complexity of the ask of our students and its dependency on the type of assignments. The time on task calculator will try to get at some of those complexities, whether or not they're just skimming a reading to get a sense of what the content is, or trying to get some real deep understanding and so that they can have some reflection of what they've read. You know, Sarah mentions absolutely there are a range of things we want them to do, and how long it takes them to achieve the goals that you have outlined for them is going to vary tremendously based upon your expectations. And so our suggestion is twofold. One is stop and really think about what you're asking the students to do. Use your personal experience to figure out how long it might take. And then from there, figure out, am I really on the mark with my estimate? Right? Knowing that we bring to our assignments 30, 25 years of experience. And so while we may be able to get a couple of lines of code down in 10 minutes, that is not the vast majority of our students. And so So while we can't give you a specific answer for every single version of a particular assignment, what we would really like for you to do is think about the steps that are required to calculate the entire range of things that a student needs to be able to do to complete that assignment.
Sorry, responding publicly. Kim, you have a couple you want to answer?
Yep, I am currently answering.
Great.
Yeah, I'm currently answering. Oh shit, I can't find it. Sorry. Oh, Bruce's question. Yep.
Don't know that one. Ralph, I love that idea. The starting with broader questions and then bringing them up in the class. Also, cold calling and allowing them to pass, I think, is so important. And I personally don't cold call until at least 4 weeks into the course. But I will occasionally ask a student cold call by chat.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about not doing it right away. What I tell them is I'm going to call on you all, but you can pass for any reason. You can just say I wasn't paying attention and pass. You don't have to have a reason.
Yeah.
But what I find, which is really, really intriguing, is that some that passed, said I have to pass. Then what they do is they want to prove to me that they really do know things, and they start raising their hand later.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a really good way to engage people that are beyond the 3 or 4 that always answer your questions.
Agreed. No. Cortland, that sounds like a really exciting assignment, asking students to pick their own examples of films, and then asking them to watch it, asking them to discuss it, present it. But coming back to our time on task point or theme of this presentation, whatever time you think that's going to take, in my personal opinion, double it. Because they're going to explore lots of films. They're going to talk about those films with others. They may post on social media about those films. That's all learning, and it all counts. So one thing that I try really actively to do is to get my students to engage in the material with other people outside the class. So I ask them to post on social media. I ask them to work with their families or their loved ones or their partners or whatever. And I want to count all of that discussion time and all of that thought-provoking time as time on task. I don't want to just have that be added. I love the virtual walk. That's a great idea. And Jody, do you have them take a selfie of themselves doing it and post it the next day?
They did that on their own. I didn't ask it. And yeah, that's been really popular. They want to do that all the time.
Yep.
We limit it, so then it's special, but it's practicing what we're teaching about health, especially right now. Getting away.
My phone interview, but now I'm going to call it virtual walk. That's brilliant. And I do love the selfies. Whenever you get them away from Zoom, have them take a photo if they want to, optionally, because they really like it. and you get to know what they're doing, and you learn a lot about them. It's really fun. Oh, fun M&M exercise, Douglas. That's neat. Yeah, so another my middle school teaching training comes in real handy online. Manipulables are good, and getting people to do that. So Douglas's example here is he uses a scientist with M&Ms. Great. But keep in mind now that every time that student eats M&Ms for the rest of their life, they will remember Douglas's thing. And that's the lifelong learning that we're striving for. And that's why we count this time on task a little larger, because we know they're going to come back to it. So. Are there questions that Kim or Kiho can answer?
So there's a question that that Sarah brings up, and she says, and you can see it in the chat box, that she's only able to get through about 3/4 of the content that she would normally get through in a in-person class. And that's a question that I would like to open it up to other participants to ask whether or not this is a common sort of feeling that they are unable to get through the same amount of stuff in the online course, and what may be driving that a difference. And we can do this live, so to speak, if people want to comment.
So I can comment on that. For me, it depended on it depended on the course that I was teaching. When I was teaching complex problems, I already had in there a lot of assignments where I had them break off into different groups and do discussions, and there was much less content part to it. And so that one was a little bit easier for me to do. And in fact, I found a couple times where I had to end it early. So I had kind of the opposite, because I couldn't get them engaged as well as I really wanted to, like I would have in the classroom, where I'd kind of walk around and get them moving with other type of discussions. In the advanced science class, I was running out of time. And part of that is in trying to create breaks while I'm doing, and when I'm writing out like formulas and that, it's taking me a little bit longer to kind of get it. And, oh, I need this technology. Let me switch over to this picture and show it to you, rather than in the past, I've had all the transparencies or at least with pictures pre-made, so I could just kind of slide them in and out. And so I think it was more kind of managing everything that really lost me some time on the advanced courses.
I have to admit, I've cut back on my content some, and my classes are much better. So I'm teaching less, and I'm teaching a little bit more in different ways.
Unfortunately, I want my class to be a 2-semester class. So
Yeah.
I already overpack it. So I don't want to cut back even more.
Douglas, I know you're sort of kidding, but there's an awful lot of research and an awful lot of personal experience. I'm sure you all could think of this, that if you have a professor twice, you learn so much more, you remember them, and you're more likely to pursue their careers or use those ideas in your careers. All of my favorite professors I had twice, and I sincerely wish that AU would begin to look at sequential courses with the same person.
It's the perennial question of, do you go deep into a few topics, or do you look at many, many? And I know that discipline specific, these issues become much more apparent. I'm thinking of bio, where, the MCATs are coming up and they need to know all this information. So I think that's a hard one. That's a difficult thing to consider. So we're kind of running out of time here. Such a great conversation, and I wish we could talk about this for 2 hours, but I think that we're at the end of the day, so we'll close out here. So we've got a couple of questions for you to consider or reconsider the tasks that you have your students complete. So the first one is, are the instructions and expectations clear enough for the task? Are the students able to immediately go to the content? Do they know exactly what they need to do? Are they expending the cognitive energy and time that it takes to complete the task on the right thing that you want them to? Does the task require additional software? It could be software that they're not familiar with, so it might take time for them to learn that information. How complex is the task? Is it difficult? Is it a new task in terms of complexity? Is this the first time they're doing it? Can you break up tasks over time so that students are not overwhelmed in the last 2 weeks? So I'm thinking of mainly group projects. Are there natural chunks that you can require students to complete over the course of the semester so that they're not totally overwhelmed? Can you create tasks that have choice built into them? When we talked about the ranges on time on task, students might find that something is a lot easier for them. And they'll choose that one in terms of, okay, I want to record a video instead of writing a paper. And then the last one is, why are you having your students complete this task? Think about the purpose of the task. Is it for is it for to accomplish or maintain or create foundational knowledge, or is it to really go deep? So there's an evaluation that was popped into the chat by Paul. So we'd really appreciate it if you could complete that. We're always looking for new ideas for workshops and really appreciate any feedback that you can provide to us on this session. We will be providing the slides onto the Ann Farren Conference EdSpace page, so keep an eye out for those.
Kim, can I
Yes.
ask? I should have done this earlier when we were asking what have you done, but I wanted to showcase Noemi to, I know I'm embarrassing her, but I want to know what she's done, because at the end of her course, our students were so impressed that they made her a Zoom video, each one of them thanking Noemi individually and all of that. So Noemi, what did you do? What was your secret that they were thrilled with you? You still there?
I'm here. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. I think I had to give up a little bit on the content, as Heather said, and live with it and use more time for creating community. These were first-year students. They had not had a chance to come together as, typically first-year students do. And so creating community was really important for them. And I think that's probably what happened, that we balanced the content with that opportunity in the days we came together, and gave them voice in terms of feedback of saying, okay, so what is it that's working and what's not working for us? And so I think those elements might have been what made a difference. And it was really sweet of them to make a video. Thank you, Sarah.
I attended 3 sessions today, all 3 of which talked about student evaluation, saying how important community was to them and also how important connecting with the professor was to them. And they included emailing with the professor, conversations with the professor, and how much that mattered.
I want to thank all of you again for sharing with us your time. And we're going to end this session and return to the main part of the conference for the social part. And the CTRL